Oh hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to discuss what I call the TV set model of reality. What I really need to do is I need to get a flip chart, and I will do this, and diagrams, because the way I think, and I've spent years trying to figure out how to explain these ideas, I really need to draw diagrams, and just speaking is not great. Yeah, I could do it on the computer, but believe me, I've tried, and I have zero artistic ability, and the diagrams come out like 3-year-olds on crack cocaine, so no. But in this video, I will just discuss it because I want you to have a starting point. These are all, say, come from discussions of people I've met who've asked me to do this channel and explain more. So, how first of all, you need to understand how an old-fashioned television set works, and then I can explain that essentially what you most people perceive as reality, except for those of us I've explained maybe in other videos that have this outside the TV set perception, I call symphonic perception. I became aware of it, I say, about 7, 8 years old that I had it. And I've met lots of people. It's about 1 in 100 that have it quite strong, and maybe 10% of people can develop it. So anyway, let's go. So how does the television set work? Um, so you have a screen. It's similar to computer screens, but let's just go with this because it's the old-fashioned ones is better for what we have to discuss. It has a chemical on it called phosphorus, like a layer of phosphorus on a screen, and these are dots, which most people know about pixels now. So a pixel is a dot of phosphorus, and what happens inside the television is that a beam of, we could call it light, it's actually what we call an electron, is fired at the dot in a sequence. So it goes from the top like this, it goes across and then down and like this. Is called an interlaced pattern. Doesn't matter. But the main point is that you fire light at the phosphorus, and the phosphorus then emits a color. For the science, interested, this was an effect discovered by Max Planck. You can look it up. So anyway, the frequency of the light that's fired at the electron that's fired at the phosphorus changes the frequency of the light that you perceive. Now, there's a deep rabbit hole there. I mean, why should you perceive different frequencies as light as colors? How's that even working? That's a very good question. One of the earliest questions that I, as a teenager, started to think about, but I don't want to go there in this video. But that is a very important question indeed. But let's just take it for the sake of this discussion. That's what's happening, is that when you look at it from the outside of a television set, what you're seeing is you end up seeing an image on a screen. And what it's coming is actually from electrical information that the TV set receives, right? It's getting a transmission. It's how does it arrive at the television? Well, it's electromagnetic waves. And I say I'm not going to go into the science of this thing because it's not. You don't need to understand Rayleigh's wave equations for electromagnetism to understand what I'm saying. Okay, so this is the point. Is like often as someone that's trained, say in all high level math, physics, and all of this, I think one of the really unfortunate things is that most people are put off of science and math because the way it's taught is the impression is you have to dot every. I did a T. I was going to say dot every I and cross every T because I did it wrong. But you really don't need that. If I was teaching it, I've been sort of a teacher my whole life. I say I'm a student and a teacher. That's my nature. It's the ideas that are important, and most people are capable of understanding the ideas, but they get put off understanding science and the world and how everything works because academics makes everything, have to get exactly the right answer. You have to know exactly how the equations and the math works, which is important. It is important. Like, I had to do all that, but only if you want to go become a rocket scientist. You don't need that to understand like the basic idea of how television works. So let's sum this up. How does the television work? It's a box, and it receives these magical electromagnetic waves that somehow, you know, like radio and TV, they go through the air, we'll say, and they travel at the speed of light, actually. Um, they can be blocked by certain materials. So like when your cell phone cuts out, that's the same deal. It's because that electromagnetic wave is getting blocked. But so it's receiving this transmission, and it says, okay, what do I do with this? Well, this what that transmission encodes will say information, and this is a very important word. Information. This is a rabbit hole, a really big rabbit hole, but we'll leave this one for now. So, and then the television set creates a beam of light, or a beam of not really light. It's a beam of electrons that goes across the screen really, really fast, so you can't see it. If your human eye, your brain actually, you know that your computer has a clock speed, a speed at which it runs. Your brain also has a clock speed. It can only perceive, so buckle up, Dorothy. Okay, we'll go down a little bit here. We can only perceive reality as we perceive it at the speed of our brain, like the clock speed of our brain. It's sampling reality, just like a processor can only do so many calculations per second. So it's like if you're drunk, it kind of slows everything down, or certain drugs actually can change perception and slow it down, and certain drugs can kind of speed it up. Things like, I guess, I've never really taken anything, but like, I mean, you see a little bit of caffeine, but amphetamines, cocaine. So you see there that this perception of reality can be changed. So, but we perceive that reality is what we call continuous. That we are perceiving it. I don't really know any other words as we get into the word problem here. It doesn't seem to you that you're just sampling reality at a very fast rate, and this is the illusion. This biological computer is the great deceiver. It creates these illusions, and it makes us feel like we always have this, what I call, fully tethered reality that we are experiencing. But it's no more real than when you enter a virtual reality game. It's no different. I mean, when I wrote complex software systems, I actually developed, things like virtual reality stuff. I've done that myself very early on, and thought about this. It's the same thing. It's just that the graphics and the system is nothing like as good as this tech that is your brain. Your brain is a biological computer as opposed to an electronic computer. I also did something on optical computing way back, wrote a paper on this. And, it became apparent there that there are different types of computing. This is just a type of computer. It's just a biological computer. But it has the same limits as a normal computer. It has a refresh rate. It has a clock speed. Okay, so that's important, because if the clock speed of your brain was 100 times faster than it is, when you looked at a TV screen, you would be able to perceive that this interlaced signal, and it wouldn't look real to you anymore. It only looks real because that is fast enough, that what's called the rendering. So this going across the screen is called rendering, is fast enough to fool your clock speed, your perceptive ability into thinking it's real. Okay, you with me so far? So this isn't relevant to what I want to say to you in this video, but it is very important because it starts to build up your realization, your understanding that everything is an illusion that is constructed by a biological computer. But we always feel like this is, people use this phrase, but this is reality. What does that mean? What it is a construct. It is a rendered construct by a biological computer. That was the point of that whole explanation. It's irrefutable because we can break down how it's actually working and see that is the case. Now, how is this model the same as I'm saying is a model of this reality? So this is where we, it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, first of all, we have to discuss, where did the signal that the TV received come from? It came from a transmitter, right? Somebody had to transmit. So that signal came from outside the TV set. It's coming from out there, somewhere else. And how did it know what to encode? So that's another question. So these are what I call thought experiments that I want you to, because the things, this is how I worked through these things from a very young age to think through to where I am now, the journey that I went on about, understanding this symphonic perception that I had, and also from using both the science, logic, reasoning perspective, but also this other perception, the outside the TV set perception. So what I said to myself was, well, hang on a minute. If I had a television set and I could go back in time to ancient Greece or Rome, take your pick, what would their perception be? If I could do that, right, and you put a television set in front of ancient Romans, and what would their perception be of what they were seeing? Okay, this is a thought experiment, one of the early ones, very early ones I did. Absolutely, 100%, every Roman would believe that they were looking into a window to another world, or sort of a world contained in a box somehow. There is not one Roman who would think, well, that's a bunch of electronics and there's an electromagnetic wave transmitting into the box, and then it's rendering using an electron beam to phosphorus and emitting light frequencies equals HF. Right? Zero Romans. So why could we see that, those of us that have studied this science, but they can't? They would perceive it as reality, a type of reality that was contained inside the box. Now, they might try and smash the box up or somehow examine it, but they would never be able to figure it out. They wouldn't change their perception. They would just be baffled, right? So that the why question, why? So you think about, this is what I mean by doing the work. Okay, so doing the work is, I can sit here and I can take you through all these steps and journeys I took and thought experiments and thinking, but the effort of you trying to think why is also important. Okay, but maybe you stop the video and think about why for a bit, what might be helpful. But okay, let me take you the next step. The answer why is because we perceive things. This is what I'm going to say here, and I do not exaggerate. Well, okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much, is literally one of the most important ideas you will ever hear, but you've never heard, most likely. I've certainly never seen anyone talk about it. So I call this the perception filter, and I want you to think of glasses. Now, when you put imagine you could put different glasses on. It's like if you go outside and you put sunglasses on, it filters your perception, right? It filters the light differently. You could have different colors. The Romans could not perceive that as a box of electronics and how it works, because they don't have the understanding of how it works. So you can only perceive things from what you already understand. Right? The same way, so I put this in a different way. That's a technological example of a perceptual filter. Here's another one. If you could go back in time to when you were 5, and your 5-year-old self said, what's it like to be you as an adult? Could you explain that to them? Again, think about it. Could you? I mean, you could explain it, you could use the words, but could they understand it? So this all comes back to Lao Tzu and my statement about the wisest statement ever said. We're trying to get there, trying to get elevated to understand why he said, my words are so simple, but no one can understand them. What he's, as I take it from my journey, is he's describing this perceptual filter. Or another thing I call it is a perceptual paradox. What I mean? So bear with me. This is so unbelievable if you can grasp it. Okay, I kid you not, it will completely change your perception of everything. But it is very difficult to get to. So I just have to keep giving you different examples. So the Romans couldn't perceive the television as electronics; they would perceive it as this window. Your 5-year-old self couldn't ever perceive what it's like to be the adult you, no matter what words you use, because words describe experiences, and we only understand what we've experienced. So in those two examples, your 5-year-old self has not experienced being an adult, so no matter what words you use, you cannot understand that 5. And the Romans have never experienced electronics, but we could move them forward in time, and we could teach them that, but it would take a really long time. So this is a a perception gap. Now, why do I say that this is so important? It's like putting on. So I have sort of metaphors for you to ways of understanding these ideas, because I can't fully, even though you think you're understanding what I'm saying, you're not, and for reasons that we have to cover about this language and perceptual filter, because the same thing happens. It means any two people, this represents two people, there's a difference between what they've experienced in their lives and what we could say no, but what they've experienced. So even though they can, again, use words and describe things, those words will mean different things to the two different people. This is called polymorphism. And thus, there's always a perception filter between those two people. So I give you an example of this. People meet you and you have a conversation, or it might even be friends, and they have a perception of who you are. But that perception is a perception filtered from who they are. They are only capable of perceiving you based on who they are, what their experiences are, not who you actually are. They're not capable. And I mean, the closest you're ever going to get is if you've both had literally identical experiences from birth to adulthood, or you spend an incredible amount of time with someone over your lifetime. But also it depends on this biological computer, right? So if those aren't matched, then your perceptions will always be different. I know I'm sort of going down the rabbit hole a little bit, but so this is the thing about this biological computer is it creates a reality, a construct, but it's not real. It is a virtual reality. And one of the things it does is it always fools us like this. It said, like, you always feel you understand. Oh, that's my friend. That's this person. That's how they are. But be aware, it is not. It cannot be. It is simply your perception. It's sort of like a Venn diagram. You ever seen that with the circles? Who you are will represent as a circle, and who they are is a circle. And your perception of them is the intersection of that two things, who you perceive them to be. But it will never totally overlap. You will never have a true understanding of another person. And the closest you would get is if you were identical twins, so you had identical biological computers, and you had identical experiences. That would be the closest, if you ignore the fact that you also are more than that, which I've said. You're also this symphonic self that is outside of that, in which case you are always unique and different. So actually, that doesn't even hold up. And this is a very important point that we will discuss. Why does my light always go like this when I'm making these videos? Let me see. It really is a conspiracy, alien conspiracy, I think. Look, let's see if I can. I'm not sure that's any better. Okay, I just, I can't think of everything in a linear way. My mind's very what we call non-linear. So when I think of things that are important to say, I put them in the video. But that doesn't relate directly to what we're going to discuss, but it is massively important. And I will be riffing and talking about this, because if we could get every human, virtually no one knows or thinks about this right now, because most people are under the spell of this biological computer and completely unaware of how it works. So I call that understand the calibration of it, which is what I've spent my life understanding. How does this work? What's going on? So it's sort of like, I hesitate to use the word, like, so I won't use it. Okay, we won't say that, but it is massively important, because until we can see how the human brain is working objectively like this, we are being essentially controlled and fooled by it, which is most people ever. But this is absolutely critical because, like, for example, all judgment, like people, the idea of judgment is ludicrous once you understand this. How the hell can you judge someone else when you're not? Most people are not capable of understanding what biological computer they have, what symphonic self is expressing through it, and what experiences have accumulated within that to create this unique um, entity that you are not capable of perceiving because you are completely different to that. Everybody, it would be like, it's sort of, I don't know, I'm making this up on the fly. I should think of a better example, but I always say about the lion and the penguins. The lion moves to the Arctic and it doesn't fit in, and the penguins don't realize it's not a penguin. They think it's just a funny looking penguin, a furry penguin, and they're like, I don't get it. Why does that furry penguin hate the cold so much? It's great here. So that's an example of what I mean by this perception filter that is going on with everyone all the time. And the trouble is, this biological computer, it's I talked about its clock rate, its speed. It operates very, very quickly. So another important point here is what you perceive as you, most people's perceptions anyway, which is the voice you hear in your head or thoughts that pop into your head. We won't go into this now, but that isn't you. That is not you. The voice you hear in your head and thoughts that pop into your head is mostly what I call the social construct identity from the cultural download, which we'll discuss. It's not you. Okay? Very little of the real you, of the symphonic you that's expressing there. Anyway, I should try and stick to the topic at hand. It's very difficult for me because my mind is like a whirling derbyshire that wants to go off, as someone called me once, Scott, Mr. Tangent. Yeah, it's just, I can't help it. So let's stick to our TV discussion. How is reality like a TV set? Well, I'll tell you, finally. Imagine that the TV set is sitting in front of you and it's showing whatever it's a movie. And imagine if you could climb inside the TV set and be inside that screen, okay, and part of it, and somehow, let's forget about the technology of how that's working right now. But if you could climb inside the television, some physicists would say it's a hologram, but that's just adding an up complication that's not important. We'll just go with this. A hologram is three-dimensional, right? But let's just say you could climb inside the TV set. I know that's not technologically possible. That's not important. It is if we changed it. Let's say that the TV, you had a virtual reality headset that hooked up to the TV and you picked a character and then that character can go and it's a game that's on the TV screen and then you could go into it. There you go. So we can solve that technologically. But the key point is that somehow you step inside. Imagine you then could try to understand. You were like a scientist and you didn't remember that you've gone inside this at this point. And you'd be looking around, using scientific method, which is what we call observation, looking for cause and effect inside this television. And you'd be trying to understand it from inside the television. What would you see? What would your perception of that reality be? It would be your reality would be the TV screen. Well, you'd see electrons, these point particles they're called in physics, and you'd see how the TV was operating. All right, we come up with rules, physical rules, and we call them physics rules of the television set from inside. Remember, but that's another example of a perception filter, right? We see how we're working from inside the television, but what about the information that's transmitted to the TV set? We wouldn't be able to see that, right? We would just say, oh, it's coming, it's mysterious, it's coming from outside, it's like it's random, it's now, I don't want to go into science, but I study very advanced like quantum physics and the rules of physics and all of these things. So we probably can't go into too much of that here, but you might say from inside the television set, similar to we do in our reality, well, it's just kind of random. We use this word random, random. And I used to challenge people and say, well, how do you know it's random? I mean, everything appears to be random until you can understand the patterns. Well, yes, but in science we're limited to what we can observe, by which we mean from inside the box. We can't look outside the box. So that's the same. The transmission to the TV set would appear to be kind of a random. There's patterns, but where it's coming from, we wouldn't understand where it's coming from because we're now inside the TV set. This is exactly, really, our situation when your so-called consciousness was just another word. What does that mean? So when your consciousness, your symphonic self, shift its focus, is what I would say, into this box, you lose awareness, or most people do, of where the transmission is coming from. But the transmission is always coming from your symphonic self, from outside of this box. It's just, I was born with an awareness of this, and I've met other people, but most people don't have that. Essentially, most people aren't meant to have that. But that's a long discussion. I talk about going up this mountain. You're not meant to have this perception until a certain point, because by not having it, people who don't have it, they have this fear of death and wanting to survive. It puts them in the survival mode, and it means you're going to go through what I call your physical journey. Mostly your physical journey. That's what it ensures. It ensures that you focus on your physical journey, which is about initially survival and fear of death and these things that drive you. So this is one way you can tell someone that's more connected to their symphonic self, is like, I never, even as a child, had any fear of death because I knew this wasn't, air quotes, real. I knew it was, I couldn't express it in these intellectual ways or the words that I would use now, but I had this knowing that, oh, this is a temporary place that I am, but it's not the real me, and it's not permanent. That's the closest I can say at like 7, 8. So I realize that most people don't have that, and we've talked about the blue perception problem, that, or color problem, that if you've never seen and you say you can see, people say you're crazy. Absolutely. There's no way to prove that you have a perception that other people don't have. There's no way to bridge that. That's another perception filter, perception paradox. If no one had ever seen and you say you can see, well, they cart you off to the funny farm, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't see. This is the problem. So, I mean, really, that's what drove my entire life, of why I studied science and the mind and everything to the limit, down rabbit holes to madness and back, because one challenge that I often and quite reasonably have had through my life, actually my sons and I discuss this a lot, is, well, how do I know I'm not insane? How do you know you're not delusional? Right. And so that journey I took related to this is, what I would say is, how do you know you're not insane? Along the lines of what I've just described in this video. And my answer to you is that if you have to define what you mean by insane. I actually think I'm the most sane person that's ever lived, because I've lived this life where I have questioned everything about my own sanity. How is this working? And realized that this biological computer is faulty, not calibrated, and therefore you could label insane. So that means nearly everybody that's ever lived or will live by that definition is insane. Only those of us that have figured this out and calibrated ourselves, which I can only pick 2 examples, which would be Lao Tzu and Jesus. Really, I don't know, probably lots of other people. I'm just picking the obvious 2 that have understood this. Okay, so everybody is capable, but that's a good starting point. You have to ask yourself, well, what does sanity even mean? I mean, how is it sane in like when you study physics to not question whether we are inside a box, and so these rules we're seeing, and we're limited, that's well, science would tell you, well, yes, but we can't observe anything outside of that, so we'll just ignore that. But I mean, I just gave you an example of the TV set. Ignoring that is when other people are telling you they have a perception that is what this is. This is the future of science, is to bridge this problem, I believe. I believe that science will eventually, I've done thought experiments, I'm not going to put this video, that tell me that we are quite close to understanding what I'm saying here, probably 100, 200 years. Things, I can explain thought experiments that will happen if we survive, that will prove what I'm telling you without a doubt. And at that point, there will be a complete shift in our perception of everything. And instead of obsessing over the physical rules, the physics rules, we will obsess over trying to understand this, what's outside the box and how can we do it. And you could look at something like string theory, which mathematically, it's not a science because you can't observe it, but it mathematically describes what I'm saying. And we can also look at something in physics called the observer effect, which also strongly suggests that what I'm saying is true. So it's not like there's no observational evidence. There is. So I mean, I turned over every rock on the mountain in science and thinking and reasoning and brain sciences and everything, and so I'm pretty confident because, you know, without these definitions, words, as Lao Tzu said, it's essentially another way of saying what Lao Tzu is saying is words are pretty meaningless unless you really define them in this way. So I sort of went through a phase of getting obsessed with definition, but that's, you know, that's another whole rabbit hole we're not going to go down now. So the answer to, well, how do you know that your symphonic perception isn't, you know, you're not delusional or insane, is you can apply that to literally everything about human perception once you understand how this all works. It's all an illusion. So, you know, I can't do that rabbit hole justice, and really I'd need everybody to take these journeys I've taken through my life to get us all in the same place so we could really have that discussion. As I say, it's no different to saying, well, I see things and you're on a planet where no one's ever seen, and they say, well, you're obviously crazy because you say you can see things and no one else has. Well, I mean, that's this perception paradox. So all I can say is everything in my entire life has confirmed that my symphonic perception is more real than what this biological computer constructs. That understanding, you know, there's no doubt in my mind. But to explain that I'd have to go over my entire life experience, which is not really possible in this video. But all I can say is that I've challenged myself. I say my obsession has never been challenging other people. My whole life has been spent challenging what I think I know and what I believe. And this is the skill you need to get up the mountain towards truth, is to focus on that, challenging, asking yourself, yeah, maybe I'm nuts. Maybe, you know, how do I trust what this computer is telling me? And these things, this is what I've done for 40 plus years, an entire life, you know, every day. And that's the work that is required to get there. Now, obviously, I'm not expecting everybody right now to do this, but this is where humanity needs to move if it wants to move forward and get out from inside the box. It's the only way. But on the flip side of that, it's not enough to just have this symphonic perception, or, you know, you could say, people would say spiritual awareness or faith or intuition. It's not enough. You need the scientific. You need both. You need both perspectives. It's the balance of your intellect, which is inside the box. It's a computer, a biological computer that's inside the box is your intellect, balancing against this other perception. This is what we are, that is the purpose, if you like, of life, of this experience, is to balance those two things. And if you imbalance them, so you're too much in this intuition side without the intellect side, then you become what I call untethered, and you can't tell, you know, whether fairies are real or the earth is flat or anything. You basically go insane in the truest sense. I see this a lot. So this is the problem. The people who reach what I call this intellectual chasm often go crazy, because and it's part of the process. It's what I tell you. I kind of had that briefly, but it's a necessary experience. But it's about balancing your intellect. Your intellect is the biological computer inside the box. You know, it's how it processes information. It can do calculations. You know, So being good at maths or science and that is in our world defined as smart. It's smart within the box. And then those of us with the symphonic self, we're smart from outside the box. But what we really need everybody to be is balanced, both of those two things. That is I understand my purpose is to understand this and express this. And I'm sure other elements of what I call the collective consciousness will also come forth with this. This is the future direction of human consciousness, is the balance of those two things. We don't have it. We're completely imbalanced. We have this complete separation of those two things. And that's, very dangerous and could lead to our destruction, as I describe in other videos. And that's my solution, is bringing these two together, and what I call this elevation, as multiple perspective, taking these journeys that I've taken you on a little bit in this video, that I have taken my whole life, because I was wired to do so. Not everybody, it depends where you are in this, but this was my purpose. Okay, so you're inside the television set. But so Mark, I'm just going over things that people have said to me, and this chair is so damn squeaky, man. Gotta oil it. This begs some questions. Obviously, it's a metaphor. And the light conspiracy is back. I apologize, my face goes like I'm being beamed up by an alien spacecraft or something. Let's see. Is that any better? A little bit. This begs a lot of questions that come up from people. I swear to God. Let me pause this a minute and see if I can. How's that for lighting? Right, now in the other extreme. Okay. Completely lose my train of thought now. Okay. It begs the question, Mark. Well, if that's true, is this some kind of technological, literally the Enlightenment, life is but a dream, or Matrix of virtual reality? I mean, yes, that's sort of true. But the thing is, the perception filter, so this is why I went over this. So let's apply the perception filter. I said the Romans wouldn't understand a television because of their level of understanding. When we say it's a virtual reality, we're using our current understanding of technology, right? I mean, you could create a virtual reality now, and you could put a headset on, give someone a drug so they forget they're in it, and you could give them a sensory suit and all these things, and you could sort of almost do it. But if this is a virtual reality in the sense that people are applying that, you're talking about creating the laws of physics, of quantum physics, and again, I don't expect people to understand all this, but let me just give you the 2-minute 101. That means you're creating something, an infinite reality that started as a point particle singularity that contained the entire universe's potential as a set of probabilities by quantum fields, that essentially created a simulation that is the universe from the beginning of time to here, including all of us. I mean, and then how all of these quantum laws work. This would be a technology that is, I mean, it would be hard to say how long it would take us to reach a point of being able to understand that, but I mean, it would have to be probably a million years ahead of where. So if you can comprehend being a technology a million years ahead of where we are now, or more, I mean, it's very hard to say. I know that was a very, very dumbed down version of what we're talking about. If I went down any one of those rabbit holes, it's so, the more you look at it, and we could talk about genetics would be another example, how a single cell works, and how the amount of what we call information in a single cell, amount of intelligence, you could say. It's mind-blowing. It's really impossible. I mean, this is about this separation again, because on the intellectual side, people, and I studied all this, nearly all of them are atheist and don't believe in anything beyond material and what's inside the box. Why? I had people study some of this stuff with me, And that's what blew their mind. They're like, I don't understand. If they know about what we call the observer effect, and they know about looking at the amount of information in DNA, and a single cell, has to be decoded by something called a ribosome. The amount of information just for that, let alone all the other functioning parts of a single cell. How can they possibly believe that this word random? I said, but that's the problem. When you give something a word, but it's as if you've understood it, this perception filter. Oh, that's just, it occurred randomly, as if you've now understood it. Okay? That doesn't give you any understanding. You're just describing something you don't understand using a word random, right? It's like saying, I used to think of this one, Newton, well, obviously not Newton, but people before, like everyone dropped objects and they saw them fall, and then you give it a word and you say it's gravity. Well, now I understand it. I mean, it's gravity, right? But does that really mean you understand it just because you've given it a word? It doesn't explain why objects fall. It just says that they do. And using this word random has allowed our intellect to, and saying that we cannot see things outside the box, things that are not observable, that don't have cause and effect, as we would say, one thing leads to another. Oh, well, we can't look at those things. It's the biological computer fooling us. It's giving us an out. Okay? We cannot move forward in science with that because it's too limited. If we want to understand, if I'm correct, and I know I am correct, that we are also outside the box, and if we only look at what's inside the box and dismiss the rest of it using words like random, we will never get anywhere. We'll never get a true understanding, and that's our challenge. That's where the scientific method will eventually realize this. As I say, I will go through some thought experiments to explain why we will from AI development and other areas. We will from genetics, from understanding more about the biological computer and looking at the origins of life. All of these things will make us eventually have, even from the intellect alone, realize that this is not, that something is coming from the outside, as string theory would suggest. So, sorry, pause one second. So I don't think, sorry, I'm drinking this really nice looking green drink and it ends up getting all over my face. Sorry. So I don't think it's necessarily helpful to think about this as a virtual reality, because our perception filter, we will tend to think from our technology. I could talk about this for a couple of hours, all of these things, but I'm just trying to give the shortened. It's again like a 5-year-old trying to understand an adult. It's not possible because of this perception gap. Whatever this is, you're not going to, from the intellectual, inside the box brain intellect point of view, you're not going to be able to understand it in that way. My understanding, most of it comes from this outside of the box symphonic perception that I was born with and other people are, and I'd say most people can't develop it. So the key difference that I understand between this and, we're all like just in some sort of unbelievably advanced virtual reality constructed using point particles and quantum fields, is that there you're perceiving yourself as what you are now, right? Oh, well, it's me, I'm inside. But what this is really difficult, again, to get across, because you have to experience what we really are, you, me, outside of the box. This symphonic is so different to what our perception of, here. That is really not a useful metaphor. Like, I don't know. I've never thought there's no way to bridge the blue perceptional problem. I mean, you have to experience it. But as I say, the best description is why I call it your symphonic self, is that what we, you, me, everyone really is first of all, we're part, the closest is that every cell in your body is alive, but makes up this biological body that is you. And in this other place, this real you, real me, we are also part of a whole. Here we appear separate, but there we're part of a whole. You're both like a unique leaf on a tree, but you're also part of the tree. You're a collective. You can't partly come here to experience that separation, that unique, that what's the word I'm looking for? The isolation of individuality here. It isn't, because there you don't really have that. We're all um, we're all part of a symphony. As for example, any vibration in a piece of music is, one frequency is part of a piece of music. um, I can only express this in terms that we currently understand because of the perception. In reality, it's beyond our comprehension here. So this is what always, gets me with discussion. Well, what about a God, and what about, are we so you're using words again that have no meaning, because the meaning comes from experience, come from perception that we don't have. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that basically religions appeal to people in the physical, who are in the physical stages for grade 1 to 10. Spirituality then appeals to, the atheism appeals to people who are dominant in the intellectual part of their journey, and then spiritualism appeals to people who are approaching the chasm. Once you've crossed the chasm, which is very few people, but take Lao Tzu, or even ironically Jesus, then these things are not necessary anymore. They were useful tools to get you there, but you see the full spectrum of frequency, the full vibration, that these are all, they're all blurry approximations of what is really going on. And we're not capable, that's the point at which we could actually understand what we're asking when we say, what is the soul, what is God? We wouldn't need to be here anymore. We would be fully evolved over there. We would have probably had, 5 billion, well, I don't know how many it takes, 5,000 journeys through this experience and fully understand it and such. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand ourselves there, essentially, through these experiences here. So in spirituality, you go about the observer. That's currently you here sitting, and you're the observed, and the observer is the part of yourself in the symphonic self-observing. But that isn't the end of it. My perception is very clear that the observer itself is observed by the collective, and the collective itself is observed by an overall consciousness, which that's the closest we could get to saying that is God. So in a sense, and it's not true meaning, but people want to ask these questions, and I'm trying my best to give the most clarity I can. It's like saying of the human body, okay, well, every cell makes it up. If each of us is each cell, then this whole body is God. So in a sense, we are all a cell or part of the overall consciousness you could call a God, that is trying to understand itself through every one of us and every experience that has ever been had or will be had, as we evolve towards what it ultimately became in this outside of the box is symphonic self. That's not exactly, again, don't take anything I'm saying. That's as close as we can get. We cannot understand it. It's too far beyond us. That's what we're evolving. We're evolving to try and understand this. And similarly, for example, understanding of laws of physics evolves towards this. At some point, our perception of these laws will shift again as we're ready to understand the next layer of what we are in this other place. In a way, this place, this virtual reality, is evolving to become what we already are in this other place. So, but we're doing so in a way that we can understand how we became that. That's really what I understand is going on, and it's very involved. And that raises a lot of questions. But that's essentially, some people would say, following on for this, well then, this one comes up a lot. Is this a simulation? This is a common one. Because quite a lot of people have looked at this and understand this. Well, I say it's not a simulation because there's elements of simulation there and what I described and understand. but it's not a simulation, because a simulation is, there is no differences, there is no change. It is just, it's static. It goes, plays from the beginning with the Big Bang, um, all the way through to this I call the experience domain. This simulation then, in this case, eventually becomes the same as this outside the box. So the inside the box eventually evolves to become the same as the outside the box in a simulation. But no, that isn't, because what's happening is that what's inside the box involves these what I call forks in the road, or train stations where you can get off. So taking trains, things that happen, that could be considered simulation, and getting off on the stations is, there's, you could consider this word choice. Um, many world theory would say, or that every fork is taken to experience in every way. Um, but let's not go down that rabbit hole right now. But it's not important. There's just so much complexity I'm leaving out here. We perceive that we are only here in this reality, but actually we are experiencing every one of those potential realities simultaneously, but we don't have a perception of that. So that time you met someone and you liked them, but you walked away and you didn't develop a relationship, versus the time that you did happen. It's just they both happening all at once, just beyond our perception. And this is how we understand things, because, as I said before, we understand through contrast of experience. We understand hot because we've experienced cold. We understand up because we have down. We contrast black to white. Everything is polarity, is contrast, is binary, because this is the nature of this domain, to learn through the contrast of polarity. But it also gives rise to a lot of our problems, because then people's perception and the biocomputer get trapped in believing that is reality, that things are really, you're either black or white, you can't be in between, you're either male or female, you can't be in between. Everything gets rigid because of that. And that's another learning experience that we're now currently entering, to overcome that binary polarity nature. I'm getting tangented, aren't I? I was trying to stick to this point about it's a simulation. So in a sense, it's part simulation, part about, as I call it, the experience domain, about making these choices and contrasting them. So it is and it isn't, just like it is and it isn't a virtual reality. What it is is just unbelievable. I mean, it's the work of the ultimate savant, genius, scientist of all time, who is a million billion times smarter than Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, the more you understand it, what's really going on, the more humble and you are about it. I mean, probably when I was younger, and was considered pretty smart, I thought I was in some ways, but then the further I've gone on this journey and tuned into this other thing, and I really, with an unbounded mind, looked at everything, and not be trapped in this, I only accept what I can observe, which is important. It is important, but it's not only, my other perception is important. You really realize how it's sort of like an ant walking on a I don't know, a silicon chip, and what comprehension would it have? I mean, it's blindingly obvious to me at this point, of like, it's way beyond any of us, like, what is going on here. I challenge any physicist who, quantum physicist, to explain the observer effect, and don't let them say it's just a mathematical artifact. Explain away what's called the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation of the observer effect. Okay, so I mean, we could go into all these things. We're going to realize pretty soon, in the next 50, 100 years, just how little we know, because we've obsessed about this one side of it, this one intellectual. Once we realize that no, we are in this box, and the question is what's outside, and what's then we can look at everything different. I would have to give specific examples, but I mean, a single cell as example, like once you really look at that unboundedly with this context, um, you're just blown away. Like, um, so this leads me to us to. I'm not going to go into that in this video. Um, origin of life, and so what I often say, sorry, is I prefer the phrase experience domain to simulation. It's part simulation, but I've gone over this, but it's not. It's part virtuality, but it's not. It's a place for us to have this symphonic entity to go through what I've said. You have to play back what I've said in the video to have these experiences, observe itself, introspect itself, essentially. But it's also this place where it's crazy is only information. So the final part of this video, because I bet it's getting long. My videos always get long, but I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep the train of thought. This domain is an information. So if you're inside a television set, you understand that we went through that information was received for electromagnetic transmission from a transmitter somewhere else, from outside. And I said, but what is it? Again, we're using a word, but what is information? Again, it's like this word randomness. Nobody challenges these things. Okay, so you got to have this challenge, questioning mind, if we want to move forward as a species. What is then information? So information really is something, is the intent of intelligence, really what it amounts to. So let's take a cell. A cell contains a part of it inside every cell called a ribosome. And this ribosome can take a code as a set of letters called a nucleotide sequence, and it can read it, can decode this. So your DNA is code, and this can decode it, and it can build. It's like a factory that can build proteins that then are sent out of the cell. Okay, there's parts of that I'm missing out, something called transcription and whatever, but I'm just simplifying. But that's a type of intelligence. I mean, how did the nucleotide sequence has to match up with these ribosomes to construct, for example, another cell? It has to have all the correct code to build another one, so that your cells can replicate and copy. So if there was any error in the code, or there was any error in the ribosome factory, the coding and decoding, it wouldn't work. So it has to be perfect. This is a massive level of what we would classify in information theory as information. What's the probability of that? Well, I won't even go there. Of that, like, where did it come from? It's. But that's not even the thing. The thing is that every cell has errors constantly. So it has what we call, errors to the double strand DNA, and that's happening all the time. And then there are processes intracellular inside the cell, processes that detect errors in the coding and correct them. Because if they didn't, then that would be going wrong constantly, and you would get cancer, or you would get other. That's like, I mean, we don't even understand currently how a lot of that machinery is working, because it's at such a small level. The more we look at it, the more complicated it gets. I could go into this much more about the immune system that I've studied for 15 years. I mean, we do not understand the immune system. Don't believe anybody that says we do. Look, I'll make a separate video on that. Ultimately, it's the same problem that we had in the 1800s. We were trying to understand what is everything made of. So said, it's made of these tiny things called atoms. But what if we chop that up? And what's the smallest thing? Atom represents the idea of atomic, which means can't be made smaller. But it wasn't true. We can, and we keep chopping up, and we reach what are called point particles, like electrons and quarks and bosons, that can't be chopped up any smaller, as far as we know, right? That's as far as we've got. But as far as we can tell, we could go into that, but they're not. The thing is that they don't really even exist. I remember trying to explain this to someone once. Um, he was a I can't remember what his field was, but he just couldn't accept what I was telling him. Which I said, well, you do realize there's nothing here. There is no physical anything here. And this is something that everyone that's really understood quantum physics understands, but very few people's minds can grasp it. There is nothing here. What there is like being inside that television set. There's the potential for information to appear on the TV screen. On the TV screen, you can get that. There's phosphorus, and you're waiting for the electron to be fired at the screen. What in this technology, in a sense, what there is what's called quantum fields. There's these fields, like the Higgs field, give the potential for one of these point particles, a Higgs boson, to appear. So if you looked at that, when you try to do experiments, what you get is that there's a probability that things could be here. I mean, if I take my glass, you could say, well, I'm holding a glass. This glass is here. But that's not what quantum physics says. What there is an observer, okay, your consciousness, that creates the potential for the glass to be here. We could call this it's called the quantum probability equation, or waveform. And as you observe this, it collapses it and makes it real. Before you were here, it's not like that thing about the tree. Is if trees, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it make any sound or whatever? It's the same thing. I mean, this is the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation of the observer effect, which everyone should know about. So, this is the same deal. So everything, really, what I'm trying to get across is you really are inside a television, like that's information. It's the same here. Information only appears, what you're perceiving as reality, at the moment you choose to look at it, to be conscious. Um, it's something that's very hard to get across, but we'll probably come back to that one. I can't think of a good analogy, really. It's, no one really has. I've come across, and this is the hardest element of this to really get across. But so even my DNA, that is in a cell, and the DNA constructs my body. That my symphonic self is using for this experience, but it's all in just information. There's a paradigm in computing which I used that is very similar to this. When I came across it, I was like, this is maybe, because what we're creating, as I say here, is eventually trying to understand that all of this is coming not from here, it's coming from this other place. So over time, eventually we will understand it. So there's a paradigm you could look at. It's called model, view, controller. And I think that's very similar to what we're experiencing here. The model is that your symphonic self. The view is what you're perceiving as reality, the information domain here, the experience domain. And the controller is the sort of control, the swapping between the rendering of this and in this other place. So the bridging of the symphonic and the intellect. I mean, it related to this also, I know I'm starting to go down some rabbit holes here. We will eventually have to really go down, but I think this is a really interesting one, is the separation between intellect and symphonic self. It's experienced by everyone all the time. Anytime you go on the internet and you do a Google search and you say, I want to understand this, it's part your intellect, where it's in the information domain. But your actual understanding often eventually crosses over into this symphonic self. And I'll make a video about that someplace. That there is really, so that crosses, where that crossover happens, I call the veil. The veil. It's where it happens, but you can't see it. It's the same as the observer effect in quantum physics is a veil. It's the same with the perception paradox in the mind. we can look at the human brain, but we can't currently change it. Of course, this is what I'm saying. Eventually, we're going to change it, and as we will start to change the computer to begin to understand some of the issues that I've brought up, and therefore perceive differently, and try to cross the veil. The veil is this separation between intellect and the symphonic self, and the veil is in the middle. So, but that we all experience this all the time. It's almost like, well, you gain understanding, or you feel you gain understanding. You couldn't really say how, or like where it came from, and that's what's happening there. It's, you go to bed with a problem, and you wake up, and somehow you understand it. That's, you're downloading from your symphonic self. It's really what it can be both. I mean, some learning can be purely in this, inside the box, in pure intellect. Learning, for example, to do a maths equation. So maths and logic and reason is almost exclusively inside the box, and anyone can learn to do that. But once it involves perception, so anything to do with sensory information, touch, sight, sound, experience, all this symphonic, you're crossing over to your symphonic self, because all of that is happening there. That's in the model. It's in this other place. We just perceive that it's happening here. It's just say to people, and you can do it right now, hit yourself. You feel that? Oh, you do? Well, if you feel it, that didn't happen here, it happened there. Okay? It can't be happening here, because we could do a thought experiment. I mean, I just say to you, ultimately, if it's happening here, that means everything that carries electrical or chemical signals is feeling. It's not happening in the brain. There's nothing there. We could go through that thought experiment, but we will see this once we build artificial intelligences. The same thing. It's not possible with non-biological material for it to actually feel. You can emulate feeling, you can make it pretend like it's feeling, but it's not actually feeling, because that's a property of biological material that is, we could say, for the sake of this discussion, quantum entangled to your symphonic self. That's not what's really happening, but that is a way we can understand it with current science, is to say that this body, biological information body, is quantum entangled to your symphonic self outside, and that is where the feeling is actually happening. It has to be true. There is nothing within this domain that can explain feeling. Okay, it can't be. You can't say, well, it's just electrical signals going to your brain, because in that case, as a joke, your telephone could feel. That gets electrical signal. I mean, that's just, again, like using things without thinking them through. It cannot be the case. Equally, is problematic. So you built an AI and it has electrical signals. You're saying that's what feeling is. No, look, touch it, hit yourself. You feel that, right? And it's the same with all of your perceptions. It's the observer that is where it's actually happening. This is just a view. If you separate this enough, you become aware, like I am, that you literally are just kind of occupying quantum entangled into this. It's not real in any sense of the word. It is ironic because everyone refers to this as reality. It could not be less reality in that sense. It's be more accurate to say the current view of yourself here, experiencing view. As I've gone through, I've covered a lot of stuff, quite a lot of steps down to quite a few rabbit holes. Yeah, we probably need to come back. I need to get a whiteboard and we can sort of go through this. And again, we can use this word vibration. What I could have said here is, so because people want, like, particularly if they're dominant in the intellect. I know a lot of people, and we have these discussions, and I try to say, well, okay, I can give you a description, but it's not accurate. But they're like, well, yeah, just tell me. So we could say that. We could say, okay, the way this is working is that everything here is a point particle, which is in these quantum fields, probability that they exist, or consciousness, whatever that is, but your symphonic self, the observer, manifests that information here, and it's quantum entangled to your symphonic self in this other outside of the box, and that is, and each of those point particles is a string, which is the endpoint of vibration that manifests the different types of what we perceive as particles here. So, but then we're using a word like vibration. What is a vibration? Okay, so then this is where this is the hardest lesson, the hardest part of the chasm that I talk about, is intellectual chasm, is to constantly have this a constant awareness that I'm using a computer that can make me feel I have understanding that I don't actually have, is a property of this thing. Now we will go into that much more. That is a really dangerous opening Pandora's box rabbit hole that I hesitate to go down. But if you want to cross the chasm, there's no choice, and you will essentially have to go insane. But I'm not going to go into that right now. But to truly cross it, to truly grasp this, you have to have a full awareness of how this is really working, particularly in this area of perception of words and how it fools us all the time. We feel we understand like everything I've said in this video, but it's not actually possible. That's what's happening because of this perceptual paradox. So how do we overcome that? And you have to do the work, and you have to overcome it if you want to cross the chasm and you want to connect more to your symphonic self. That's, it took me 20 years of an hour a day working on that. I'm not saying it's easy, and you don't have to do it in this lifetime. You've got multiple forever, but that's what we have to all get to eventually, so collective, everyone can shift out of the pure intellectual phase right now to this bridging, which is our destiny. And that's, of course, as I described about the filter and the powers that be, they cut us off and turn us all into just purely intellectual beings with no ability to perceive this other, outside the box, and that would be a damn shame, wouldn't it? All right, so let's end this video here, and maybe I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.